really late to jump on the Diablo Immortal hate wagon, but I don't make videos for a living, so who cares how late this comes out? I want to air my own grievances because I think a lot of the discussion about Diablo Immortal is ignoring the gameplay in favor of talking about the game's monetization. If you browse the glorious zero point 0.3 Metacritic reviews, all of the top rated ones, both positive and negative, are focusing on monetization. I agree that the monetization is egregious and unconscionable. I'll link some videos in the description that cover a multitude of psychological tricks and manipulation in fantastic fashion, but I'm not going to focus on that in this review. Before we get too far along, I want to make a few things abundantly clear to anyone who watches this. The game's monetization is egregious and in desperate need of regulation, but it is also true that many players are going to play the game without engaging in it at all, or at least not be on the level that is appropriate for their particular circumstance. Those instances are more or less fine, but I still don't think that the game is worth playing, even under those personal circumstances. The second thing that I need to make clear is that I'm going to be very negative and pessimistic in this review. Those are the opinions I hold. That said, my intent is not to persuade anyone who likes the game that they should not like it, and it's fine by me if you disagree with my thoughts and feelings in this review. I'm the arbiter of truth for my own perception and opinions, not yours. I'd also like you to know my background prior to playing the game so you can understand how I approached Immortal. I'm not a Blizzard fanboy. I've tried Hearthstone in the past, I've played couch co-op Diablo 3 once or twice, and the most similar game prior to Immortal that I've played was Torchlight. I was excited to get back into a similar hack and slash ARPG experience in Immortal, and perhaps have it available on my phone, even better. But it should be clear that I didn't have any prior experience or knowledge about the series' mechanics or lore, so I wasn't comparing Immortal against those kinds of expectations. I ended up playing the game for about 30 hours, mostly on my phone because the PC port is truly awful. I played a Barbarian to around level 40, and a Wizard up to Paragon 1. I didn't spend a dime on either character. That's largely why I'm not too interested in talking about monetization. I didn't experiment with it. It would be pretty dishonest to try to synthesize any thoughts on it, or at least not better than the ones that I have listed in the description. Now is also a good time to note that you may have noticed I didn't record any footage before uninstalling the game, so we'll have whatever I've conjured in post for visuals. One final prelude before looking at the gameplay systems and my experience in Diablo Immortal. A lot of PC and console gamers seem to have expected Immortal to be an ARPG like the previous entries in the series, but now available on their phones. You guys have phones, right? I believe the actual product, however, is better identified as a gacha game that happens to feature ARPG elements and the Diablo IP and brand. Blizzard's own marketing plays into this perception as an ARPG first, so it's not like gamers are to blame for missing this. But as someone who's been playing gacha games for years now, it isn't inherently a mortal blow to the game's potential, but it's something that sets a lot of expectations differently than a traditional seasonal or single campaign ARPG would. And I think that's a lot of where certain elements that people didn't expect have come from, like the 10 Crest Elder Rift run emulating a Gacha 10 pull, why 3-star gems are non free to play ones that actually have value, and the crests are so central to character power level and so on. So I think that knowing that the game is better classified as a gacha with ARPG elements would definitely have helped to stave off disillusion with the game, but it's too late for over 10 million installers, so whoops. All that said, simply clearing up the genre label and tweaking or even outright removing the monetization is not going to fix the game. So I want to talk about the two main camps of problems that I had with the game. First is the actual progression systems and the design of the grind in Immortal, and then the second is the moment-to-moment execution that surrounds the grind. These are the driving forces and irritants that created the motivation for me to even create this review. Mostly because I kept seeing reviews that have something along the lines of Diablo Immortal is a good game hidden underneath hideous microtransaction pay-to-win garbage. And I'm simply astonished by the amount of good game comments in these reviews. I simply don't believe that Immortal is bad because it's pay-to-win or the monetization controversy. Those are certainly bad, but I think that's a fundamentally bad game. Let's begin with the ARPG elements we're presented with in Immortal. If you've played the game, you can skip ahead to a timestamp I'll put on the screen, as I'm just going to lay out the equipment and the grindable components here. The most important grindable components in the game are centered on the character screen. On the left side, there are 6 accessory slots, which eventually allow you to collect an even number of set-piece items, which will grant your character a set bonus, as you may expect out of ARPG gear. Each accessory item can be augmented with a number of normal gems, which are essentially color-coded flat stat boosts that need to match the color of the item's gem sockets, also pretty standard in ARPGs. On the right side, you have 6 pieces of primary equipment, which can cosmetically affect your character, and the legendary rarities of these pieces come with an affix that will affect some ability in your class's arsenal. These can be socketed with no more than 1 legendary gem apiece, and you cannot have the same type of legendary gem socketed more than once. Each of these legendary gems have stats, resonance values, essentially a stat scaler, and will grant you a class-agnostic passive ability. These are the Gacha items in Diablo Immortal. In a somewhat uncommon fashion, though not unprecedented, Immortal makes use of 1-star and 2-star rarity as free-to-play accessible options, but by design, this virtually cuts off free-to-play players from participating in the actual gacha, creating massive pay-to-win issues. The final piece of character gear is only unlocked a bit before you hit the level cap. This is the Charm in the upper right corner. Your Charm grants up to 4 random abilities from any class, not necessarily yours, a % damage increase. There are a variety of progression systems that help you to upgrade this gear, as well as a variety of systems outside of this gear, like the Heliquary and even FOD, that provide additional sources of grind to give you more base stats and maybe some associated passives. These are mostly to-dos that keep you busy in the game and merely echo the fundamentals that are present in this gear. So, to build on top of this, each of the game's 6 classes have 12 special abilities to pick from, as well as 2 auto-attack options. You can only select 1 auto-attack at a time, of course, but you can combine any 4 of your 12 abilities as you please. No ability in the game has a mana requirement, so you can cast them like QTEs once the cooldown expires. Once you reach a level cap of 60, you unlock the Paragon levels, which allow you to access the Paragon tree for some additional base stats and passive abilities. This covers the full extent of itemization that can contribute to your build, without going into how the progression for upgrades amplify these effects. There are no builds whatsoever for free-to-play players, and those in the gacha are not so much building as they are getting a stat boost and a special standalone passive that's better than anything free-to-play players can get. So regardless of what you attempt to do in the game, damage is going to be damage. There's no paper, rock, scissors system, there's no particular build, there's only an extent of progress that dictates how much damage you can dish out. The flat, additive system is mirrored by the enemy design. Enemies have a health bar, or perhaps multiple health bars, and some animations which will deal damage if they connect with the player. Some enemies can telegraph attacks that will stun you and deal more damage than usual, others can move a bit faster or attack at a range. Sometimes you encounter color outlined variant enemies, which just have extra health that you need to chew through compared to their normal counterparts. There are also a couple of world bosses which can heal themselves whenever some newbie walks by who doesn't know how the mechanics work and crashes into them. At the Paragon level and above, you can load into newbie free world instances to take on these bosses, but they're basically large HP sponges that aren't even guaranteed to drop you any loot you can't get anywhere else. A waste of time, but technically a different class of enemy. Virtually all bosses in the game can also launch some kind of bullet hell AoE attack, which will deal slightly more damage than the normal mobs do. That's about the full extent of enemy design. Like I said, there's no paper, rock, scissors mechanic to encourage compositions or build swapping for a particular dungeon. A wizard that uses chill spells is no better or worse at anything in PvE than a wizard using fire spells, or even a monk using fist spells. The game makes no effort to motivate experimentation or utilization of the 8 skills that you have benched at any given moment, making it trivially easy to ignore 2/3 of whatever it is that your class can do. Aside from trying out an ability because the UI requested it, I only swapped abilities to change the flavor of my approach, or to swap one of my offensive skills for a defensive one on harder-hitting bosses so I didn't have to dodge enemy attacks. Ever, really. It's especially sad that your ability selection doesn't matter when Diablo Immortal uses this fixed progression path to unlock and upgrade your skills. This means that even if you aren't like me and you are excited to try a particular skill, there's no way for you to fast-track to unlock that skill. You simply have to wait for the game to unlock it for you. Similarly, you cannot emphasize a selection of skills by dumping way too many levels into your favorites, because the game will automatically level your skills for you. Admittedly, I don't know if the game manages to keep all of your skills equally effective, or if some of them will end up being stronger than the others, but the game definitely gives you the impression that the skills that you're running are equivalent in power to the skills you are not running, and this is incredibly boring to me. I would much rather feel that the game wants me to weigh the pros and cons of the particular skills, or perhaps the combination of skills I have equipped. The game is just too afraid to request that I inject fun into the experience by trying new things. While I only played the Wizard and Barbarian classes, I did check the wiki for the other 4 classes to see if I was just unlucky with those picks, but there are truly minimal interactions between skills in the game. Virtually every single skill in the game can be described as AoE ability on cooldown that deals damage. If the skill provides a buff, It comes in the form of movement speed, damage bonus, or damage mitigation. These are all good things, but nothing to emphasize following up with any other thing in particular. If the skill provides crowd control, it slows enemies down or it stuns them. Sometimes the stun is a different color. Diablo Immortal will never request its players perform a specific rotation of abilities for increased combat effectiveness. It's really a QTE combat simulator because the only thing that you do in combat is mash buttons when they become available. Congrats, you've reached maximum DPS. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, actually. In moment-to-moment gameplay, any and every class has the job to match their QTE cooldowns and then gap fill that time with auto attacks and perhaps small positioning adjustments to avoid the obvious telegraphs or the bullet hell projectiles. As a matter of fact, you don't actually need to use your skills. Each class's autos are very close to the ability that your skills deal, but with less or no AoE, which makes them sufficient to clear everything in the game, but perhaps slower at wave clearing than the class abilities. This brain-dead level of execution means that you don't have to think before or during combat. I made it to the final campaign battle before anything in the game actually made me consider my actions. And this final fight has a boss that can clone himself into 4 corners of the battlefield. When he does this, each clone will track you with a mildly annoying laser beam, which deals damage. One of the clones is going to have a red circle underneath him, and you need to kill that one within a 10-second duration. If you're too slow, the boss shuffles these clones and repeats the challenge. It's almost a DPS race, but I found that I could equivalently pick a clone to hang out with until the boss inevitably picked that one. And then I could drop all my cooldowns into it and move along in the fight. I only tried this fight once, and he did the particular move twice in the entire fight. That was the most demanding combat in the entire game. Excluding that singular mechanic, you can explore the entire depth of Diablo Immortal's combat system in about the first 5 levels or so of gameplay. The game makes the feeblest attempt to stimulate gameplay options via the gear you'll collect. Since virtually all progression in the game is promoting basic stats, you'll find that your numbers are growing up in sync with the enemy health values for the most part. The legendary affixes that alter your abilities are the only real gameplay tweaks that you can customize by choice, and they're really underwhelming. A significant portion of them make one of your abilities have a larger area of effect. Maybe it deals extra damage, maybe it has a shorter cooldown, perhaps it applies a different crowd control effect. They don't transform the ability to unlock new options and gameplay so much as they tweak the flavor. And remember, you can only have 6 such abilities equipped at a time. Well, you can only have 6 such tweaks equipped to your 4 abilities at any given time. With each gear slot having 7 options to pick from, this means that a class has 42 different legendary affixes to mix and match. Your auto attacks are never affected by legendary affixes, so each of your 12 abilities has 3, maybe 4 tweaks to it. But even then, a single piece of gear might have the same class ability on multiple affixes, which means that you're not even guaranteed to be able to go all in on certain abilities, even if you really wanted to. Outside of this and basic stats, all of the gameplay progression is attached to standalone passives. These passives come on your legendaries, your legendary gems, your Paragon Tree abilities, your Reliquary, your Sanctum, etc., etc. And every single one of these passives gives you a simple class-agnostic trigger and an equally class-agnostic effect, such as gaining a damage bonus after you deal damage, or gaining a shield after you take damage. The only differentiation in passives comes in the Paragon ones, which generally require for a party member to participate in triggering the effect, because higher Paragon levels force you out of single-player mode. To make sure I cover absolutely everything, the set bonuses in the game also fail to inspire changes in thinking or in practical gameplay. As I'm recording this, there are 8 sets in the game, each of which boil down to the same core of giving you some extra damage, some extra shields, some extra speed, or some extra CC, with no particularly interesting triggering mechanic or requirement. There's nothing in the game that works at a threshold. Any build in the game is essentially the abilities that you personally enjoy but are identical to everyone else's. The flavors that you prefer, but they don't inspire new or altered interactions. And as many stats as you can pile on top of this. Every single build pumps as many stats as it can, with the priority usually being critical stats, damage, armor penetration, and then as much of interchangeable amounts of life, defense, and resistance as you personally need to live. In an earlier version of this script, I actually went into more depth on how Immortal's health mechanics work, but in practice, enemies have to burst your health down in about 2 seconds, or else you'll pretty trivially heal it all back. They didn't call it Immortal for nothing. There's even defensive passives and abilities you can use to entirely negate the first few attempts at your life. The game is only willing to add to your stats. This means you can't make an interesting sacrifice in one attribute to power up another. There's no differentiating mechanic or meaning behind any choice that you're allowed to make in the game with regards to your build. All paths lead to dealing damage, surviving enemy damage, and perhaps sprinkling out some CC or buffs if you chose abilities and passives that do that. The largest differentiator in builds is truly the credit card, and even that fails to bring anything other than pay to win as a new option for you to consider. As bland and tasteless as the build and progression systems are in the game, people do like progression systems. It feels good to see numbers go up, and the pursuit of that number powers a lot of core loops in games, especially gacha games. And since Diablo Immortal is based on the Blizzard IP and does not allow you, at least not as it currently exists, to collect 2D anime PNGs or play as an anime waifu, the only thing beyond progression systems that the game really offers are the arenas that allow you to measure your progression. So surely this is what those reviews meant when they said that Diablo Immortal is a good game. Lizard Brain likes seeing the numbers go up, and the execution must just be immensely satisfying. I didn't build you up this much just to pull the rug out from underneath you. The moment-to-moment gameplay in Diablo Immortal lacks just as much luster as the lackluster progression systems. So for the second half of my long-form complaint here, I want to look at the structure of the campaign, dungeon crawls, the open world, and a few of the other game modes where you can express your progress in the game. Every character in Diablo Immortal is introduced to the world, their class abilities, and literally every mechanic that you'll encounter in the game through the campaign. The world building is shallow at best, and all the NPCs operate as glorified exposition dumps or damsels in distress. Some of them die. Too bad. Poor storytelling is not particularly unique in either gacha or ARPGs, but this is tremendously boring in both presentation and execution. The voice acting is fine, but not compelling. No character forms any connection to the player beyond a transactional relationship that you will summarily dismiss every time the quest marker points to the next objective that's just outside of their sphere of influence. Finishing the campaign wouldn't even take that long, except for the XP gates that are specifically placed to encourage spending a bit of money as a way to get around it. Most of the dungeons in the game have some sort of timer mechanic, where you need to kill enemies in order to spawn a boss, and then kill that boss before your remaining time expires. That said, this timer is so generous, I have never seen it run out. I don't even know what it would do if you ran out of time, which is to say that the timer may as well not exist. You kill a fixed number of enemies, the boss spawns, you kill the boss. The open world is purely a time sink, but it is one that the game is going to really drag out, especially if you stick to it in the long run. Your daily tasks will involve killing a fixed number of particular enemies somewhere, essentially spawn camping minions who die to any particular input. You'll also be able to invisibly grind for a loot drop known as Monstrous Essence, which I despise. Monstrous Essence is a drop where the game essentially waits until you killed 50 to 100 monsters, and then you get one. Collect 10, and it'll stop dropping them entirely, but you can go back to a safe area to get XP and some randomized gear. You'll also be able to fill in the art and description of a single monster in the bestiary. There's no need to consult this encyclopedia for any gameplay reason, so unless you really dislike the art, this is just a time tax that extends your gameplay. The open world also includes some items that you can touch to get a special bonus, or some extra loot, like a buff that makes monsters you kill generate bonus XP for you. But any open world bonus of this sort can only be picked up by one player on the server, for some reason, and you don't need any of them for any reason. It's kind of a way to be a dick to a random stranger by seeing that they want it, and then picking it up before they can. The other game modes are essentially small variations on this foundation that we've established, where you either do a dungeon crawl or a boss fight, and you have some kind of external mechanism attached to it that feeds your character even more base stats. A lot of the progression is time limited. I don't think most players will experience it as severely as Rax and Terax, but his video is an incredible example of just how gated the progression speed is, how it's locked down to the point that, despite lacking an energy mechanism, players can max out an account to the point that they have to wait for the game to allow them to continue progressing. I've linked it in the description as well, so it's worth the watch. The final gameplay mode that I'm going to talk about here is the 8v8 PvP match, where there's evidently no matchmaking at all until you've paid enough to clearly enter yourself into the whale-only league. The attack-defense PvP mode is still really boring, as the defenders just want to enforce a time limit or collect 55 kills. The attackers, for their part, want to progress through the map in 3 stages. The first stage features a triple boss rush, but these bosses do absolutely no damage to you and just have enough HP for the defenders to try to protect them. In the second stage, attackers have two payloads on parallel tracks and must advance them, at least one of them, to the defender's side in order to continue. In the final stage, Diablo Immortal imported an exposed Nexus crystal directly from League of Legends. If you haven't played League, you don't need to, but know that defending a Nexus essentially amounts to Team Deathmatch, where the other team can just choose to wipe you out if they're strong enough, or the attackers may suicide into the feeble objective, and usually that will chip in enough damage to win merely by nature of getting to that point in the match. That is the pinnacle of a PvP match when attackers are doing well. There are other videos that cover the pay-to-win aspects of PvP, or at least allude to them, but the map design is too simple to allow for macro-level tactics that spice up gameplay. The main difference between PvP and PvE is that player models are relatively small. They don't always telegraph their attacks very well, and they may be capable of killing you in less than 2 seconds. Even without pay-to-win fiascos, PvP is as uninteractive and uneventful as the rest of the game. So that wraps up my disappointment in the Gacha ARPG known as Diablo Immortal. It's not just a cash grab mobile title, it's a fundamentally boring game where your choices are lended no significance and there's no risk, except for the time that you waste with the stopgap measures that are purely designed to be circumvented using a credit card or days of your life. My biggest disappointment is that the game could and should have been much better than it actually is. Apple devices lack the external storage capabilities to scale to very large games, but across the board, modern smartphone hardware is capable of emulating the likes of a PlayStation 2, maybe even a PlayStation 3 nowadays, all in your pocket. We've had high-quality games on mobile for over a decade within these limits, and there's no excuse to be focusing on monetization at the expense of gameplay. Even a title like Fortnite, or maybe you prefer Vainglory, or Abzu, or Slay the Spire, or Wild Rift, or Infinity Blade, or Asphalt Legends, or Dead Cells, or even mobile-first titles like Tilt to Live, have been crushing it as a visually appealing set of games where the gameplay matters. Regardless of how you feel about these titles, just look at them. They're aesthetically pleasing, and the moment-to-moment decisions that you make matter in their respective genres. If there's someone who likes Diablo Immortal who made it this far in the video, I'm really impressed and I'm grateful that you've heard me out. I hope that these thoughts help you express your own feelings or your desires for future development in the game, as it's certainly going to stick around for a while. It's certainly too much to ask for the entire game to be adjusted in any such way that I would enjoy it, but I hope that you can see the introduction of meaningful mechanics and proper player expression that lead you to victories, to losses, to critical thought about your progression and the next steps you want to take, as well as experimentation with what the game offers. I would give Diablo Immortal a 1-star gem out of 5, but unfortunately, it is bound to my character, and I cannot trade it. Thanks.